Hello. Today is 29th of May 2019, and been a long time since I didn't upload a talk. I call them talks. This is an informal talks, and this is a way to express myself in a matter which I think I understand. Um, I hope I understand it, uh, and then I like to express myself in that sense. And 3.5 years ago, I started uploading these talks, and especially I was focused on the international conflict between the great powers, United States, China, and Russia, and this has been um, the present situation of the international conflicts and the conflict in, of societies as well and nations. So we have uh, I, I I find two different problems. First, the systemic problem, which is the system of capitalist system, which is global, and then the fight, the struggles, the conflict between the powers. And it didn't improve in the last 3.5 years. I think is in some respects is worsening the situation because we're approaching to uh, an armed conflict perhaps. But as I said before, and I said many times, a conflict between the USA and Russia, or USA and China, is will escalate definitely in a nuclear conflict. So that's a catastrophic solution. Now, for the time being, the parties are trying to control control the conflict, and every party have a different strategies. The USA with the Trump administrations and uh, his inner circle, which are about four persons. So it's Trump, Mike Pompeo, um, John Bolton, and Mike Pence. Well, they behave like a gang in a barrio, because they are bullish. And well, that's the strategy. The United States is adopting a offensive posture, and Russia and China, they're adopting a defensive posture. China is trying to win time, and Russia in the last 3 years tried to sort of appeasement. But lately they are realizing that they are in this conflict, and they have to confront the United States. I think the leadership, especially Putin and his advisors, they coming to realize that, well, there is no possibility to get an understanding, because what the United States wants is to weaken Russia, and they hope to divide it, and to separate Russia from China. And Russia and thinking that trying to integrate with Germany and have some sort of a arrangement with the West Europeans, especially with Germany. And of course, they cannot have any type of agreement with the UK for sure. and the other countries are not very important actors. Of course, they have some weight, but they follow the leadership. They follow the United States. And then I like to point out that when we're talking about Russia and USA and Europe, we're talking about the leadership, the governments, because then we have the other problems, the societies, how they how they see, how they perceive themselves, and which are the problems they have, and how can they solve it with the present system. Um, I'll go by I'll go by country. China. China is trying to win time because China is trying to develop its to go on selling, being a manufacturer, a hub, but they already developed their domestic the domestic market. Now China is led by Xi Jinping, which is the president of China, the secretary of the, I think the first secretary of the Communist Party of China. By the way, the Communist Party of China has 85 million members, and that's what makes China powerful, in a sense that against all the predictions that they the journalists or the academicians, they say that China, when develop and start having better living standards, and they might turn into sort of, or aspire and want some democracy and representations, and they might not like the only one party. Well, that's not true. That's not true. We have to think in China with a different perspective. China is not a country. Is also a country, but is a civilization like Japan, like India, and they have their history, and they have their characteristics, special characteristics. So we're dealing with a conflict of different, so to say, to speak, civilizations or cultures. I'll rather speak about cultures. So different cultures and different history and different traditions, and we cannot measure them with the same stick. So we have the American culture and traditions, which is a very powerful country. We all know that. And then China, which is trying to win time in order to further develop their country. They think that by the mid-century they will be a fully developed country, and their plans are that by year 2030 their armed forces will be the first-rate armed forces. Now the question is, will the world peacefully get to that time without war? We'll see. Now the USA is trying to block China in its expansion, commercial expansion. So the strategy of China is, of course, develop domestic society, the domestic market, the domestic progress, and also the core strength, which is the export to all countries of the world, but especially to Europe and to the USA, and is building the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road. They call it the Belt and Road. So it's by train and by road, going through Central Asia and the Middle East and into Europe, and then the maritime road, which is through the Sinai Sea, and then the Malacca Strait, going into the Arab Ocean, going into the Suez Canal, and to the Mediterranean. And now, lately, we have the Arctic route, which is going through the Bering Strait and going all the way, bordering the Arctic through by the side of Russia, and the other route might be through Canada. Now, in Canada is a different situation, because it's within Canada, and Canada saying that is a interior route, and the United States says that is international route. And then we have, from the military point perspective, that Russia has a long tradition and history of working and developing the Arctic. By the way, we have to think that the fleet in the Kola Peninsula in Archangel, and then all the way to Siberia, and the ports on Siberia, and the route with the icebreakers. Now, due to the effect of the global warming, it seems to be easier now, but nevertheless they need the icebreakers, and Russia have several of them, and with some of them with nuclear power. So other countries, USA or Canada, they cannot match the superiority that Russia has. Now, this is other point of conflict and strategic situation, either for Russia, USA, and Canada, and China as well. So this is what is being developed in the last few years, especially the One Belt One Road in China. So my impression is they will do it. It's a long time project, but will strengthen China definitely. And the conflict in the South China Sea is very. We'll see what happened there. Now, it is where might have a clash between the USA and China if they cannot control it. In that sense, China is building two more aircraft carriers, in order to have to be able to project power to the blue waters, in order to push back the fleet, the USA Navy. That's the idea, but we have to think about also the Navy of Japan, which is another actor in that region to count with, And then on the other side we have India, and those are the present situations and the present conflicts. Now, in the international conflicts, we have the actors, and then we have the journalists that talks about the problems, and especially people who talk about the problems, and well, that's their job, and they get paid for. But in this particular conflicts, the great majority of population, the audience is very limited, because in all societies people are concerned about their local problems, and persons are concerned about their lives. So those conflicts, they seem very far away and too abstract. And we have some conflicts are resolved, some others are not resolved. The latest conflict that is brewing is with Iran in the Persian Gulf. Now, the USA sent an aircraft carrier. The Lincoln is close to the Hormuz Strait in the Persian Gulf, but it's outside. It's there in the Arab Sea, and because it's very dangerous to get into might be vulnerable to an attack. Now, that might be a flashpoint, or probably close to war. Time will tell. And United States is reluctant and to get involved in a war. I mean, I think that the Pentagon especially, they are reluctant because it's a no-win situation. The United States attacked in the past only weak countries, but Iran is not a weak country. It's an 80 million people, and with the Iranian revolution of the last 40 years, but it's been blockaded, and is led by the clerics, and they have the guards, the revolutionary guards, which United States said labeled as a terrorist organization, and Iran labeled the Central Command as a terrorist organization, and behind this is Israel, because the strategic problem or dilemma from Israel is they don't have powerful foes or enemies around their borders. They have a peace treaty with Egypt. They have a peace treaty with Jordan. They interfered of course, in Syria, but Syria is in shambles. So, and then they have relations. They never had a war with Turkey, and they have ambiguous relation with Turkey, but they have a trade, a very important trade, and there is something really interesting, because Israel has good relation with the Saudi Arabia, with the Saudi family, with the Saudi kingdom, with Bill Salman. with the bees. And the Saudis got problems also with Iran. And in the Middle East, Pakistan is Iraq. So it's a mess. It's a mess. But let's think about, for a minute, let's think about the people of those countries. First, we have to think which is the income, the per capita income, and then we have to think of, for each country, the Gini index that give us the idea of the inequality. And then we have to think about the, um, the age of, or the median age of those countries, which are low. Probably they are about 20-25 years. In Europe is about 40, 35, 40. So it's on very, the population are young, and they grow, and they are unemployed. Especially the young men from 18 to 25, 30 years. You have in different countries different situations, but they always have a great unemployment, a very high unemployment. So having a young population, especially males, unemployed from 18 to 25, 30 years, that's a time bomb. So we'll see it, because they explode. They explode. And they did it in the Arab Spring, but that's a different story. But then you'll see in Syria, what happened in Iraq, and El Shaez, and Daesh, ISIS, and the problem of Israel and the Palestinian, which is an unsolved problem, and I don't know how they will do it. The two-state solution is unviable now, the way they develop. And Israel will not take the Palestinians as an Israeli citizen. I don't think so. That might be the solution, to have a Israel country, a democratic Israel. But Israel is also sort of a theocracy, sort of. They call it democracy, but it's not democracy, because they have the second-rate citizen, which are the Arabs. The population is close to 2 million, less than that. And there are about 6 million Israelis with Jewish religions. We are Jewish. So that's the problem. And then the countries are led by extreme rights extremists, with Benjamin Netanyahu, which will have probably very soon elections. And then in Turkey we have Erdogan, which is a Turkish nationalism, but embedded with the religious idea. We talk about all these countries, we have to think about the different type of elites, and the great majority of the population, which depends of the countries, not the Gulf. In the Gulf, those are the Emirates are filthy rich, the elite, but they are so rich that the citizens, which happen to be Arabs of those countries, they have a very good standard of living, because they are rentist country with the oil and gas. But they have also the problem with the workers. They come from India, from Indonesia, some other countries from Asia, Pakistan perhaps, Philippines. That's a human rights problem too. And then the other problems I try to talk about, I mean, just to describe, are the due to the problems in the Middle East, the wars in Libya, the wars in Syria, the wars in Iraq. They they migrate, they migrate to other countries in the Arab world, but also the ones who got some means to do it, they went to Europe. And then we have the revival in Europe of the rights and the extreme rights. Now, um, when those particular extreme rights flourished, when there are crises on the system. It happened in the 30s, the last century, and then due to the first World War and the global crisis, we can see it in those days, the rise of Mussolini in Italy in the 20s, um, Franco and the civil war in Spain in the 36 until and he remains until he died in 75, and Hitler. So we all know that. And now there are neo-Nazis, but they are also political parties. We'll follow the right its solution, which is always dangerous, and they are nationalists, but not in the radical terms, not in the normal nationalistic sentiment. No, they are a sort of nationalist aggressive mode, and against the immigrants. But they blame the immigrants because they need some people to attack in order the politicians to unify their countries. And we have that in Hungary, and lately in Poland. In England, it was a different reaction. They tried um, to exit from the European Union, the Brexit. No, Theresa May had to renounce, and then we'll see until October what happened there. And I'm going through the world. I like to say, well, let's go to America, Venezuela. Now, in Venezuela, the United States is trying to have a government change, a regime. They call it regime change. It's a constitutional government. But in the last 15 years, the USA was very busy attacking other countries, attacking Iraq, attacking Afghanistan, creating turmoil in Syria. So they was very busy, and they tried to change the government in Venezuela, but without employing too much efforts. And of course, I forgot to talk about the Colombia with the peace agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC, uh, armed force of Colombia, that they did it almost two years ago in Cuba. So um, I like to talk about Colombia. Colombia is led by extreme rights too, and of course they are enemies of the socialist government of United Socialist Party Venezuela, led by the President Maduro. Now, the international media always talk about the leaders. Also, they talk about Putin in Russia, Maduro in Venezuela, um, Bashar Assad, al-Assad in Syria. So they have to have they they talk always about a leader, and then they demonize the leader. They do it with Putin, and then do it with Maduro, and then do it with Bashar Assad in Syria. So the great majority, the audience, they always follow these small stories, little stories about the leaders. And of course, I have to talk about Russia. Russia that tried in the last few years to have a better relation with the USA and also with the European Union, and it fails. And but now is adopting a more stronger posture, especially against United States, but always having in their hand the olive tree. And the United States I think that the leadership of the United States, they feeling that now this is the right time, because the United States has a formidable armed forces, and they're trying to solve the declining the decline phase of the USA by applying the military pressure in their diplomatic and economic efforts, which we can see it in Trump. Trump is a populist and demagogue, but also in the United States they have a systemic problem. This type of of personalities rises when the situation is appropriate. I have to think about when in my childhood years, when I was a child. I'm living in Argentina, and Peron arises too. And well, that's a different story. But I was remembering when those leaders come to any given society, and they have a populist rightist from the right narrative. Now, in the case of the USA, Trump, he's surrounded by very aggressive personalities which are his on tour, and his political base is the white working class from the USA, especially the white working class, and on the other side they have, that's typical from the rightist movement. They have a base that support them, but they real benefit the, let's call them the super capitalists, the super rich. And that's what Trump did. They cut the taxes, the first thing he did. And he didn't solve the problems. Now, he cannot, because we have to understand the logic of capitalism. and the logic of this kind of systems. So they claim in the United States that in the 70s and 80s, all the factories, the industrial, they lost the industry to China. They don't lost the industry to China. The owners of the 1%, the owners of the corporation, they decided that was cheaper be, before China. They went into Philippines. First they started in Japan, but in the 60s. Then they went to Korea, then to Taiwan, Philippines. Now they go to Bangladesh also, and some different kind of business in India. But from the 80s, after the development of the economic exclusive zones in China, they thought it was real good opportunity, economic opportunity to get into China first, and that's what they did. And China wanted also that type of investment. So they are probably they are in China great variety and amount of American corporations who happen to export to the USA, export to USA. So it's a very complicated mix. It's a very complex equation, because we live in a very complex system in all respects, and is very intertwined. So we cannot, like it's looking in the microscope, a given problem, because there is a spread. It's spread like a net, like a web, and is a very difficult situation to solve. The problem that let's say the United States president said he will bring back the jobs and the industry, and then there is another problem too. Industries nowadays, they have robotic, like in Japan. They start in Japan. They're very strong in that sense, because they don't allow the immigration in Japan. But and then we have the next problem is the artificial intelligence. That's for the future. So the system expel more than absorb. And even with the breakthroughs, the technological breakthroughs, the solution is more political than economic. Now, the 1%, they know this, and sometimes it's very funny to watch and see the representative of the 1% talking about the universal assured income, which is we'll get to that point some days in the future. Now, going back to Venezuela, Venezuela is in very difficult, desperate situation, economic situation, because the USA is an open economic warfare against Venezuela. It started 15 years in the 15 with Obama declaring that Venezuela was a threat to the United States, which is a lie. It's not a threat, but well, that's what they did. So they start the sanctions against Venezuela. Now Venezuela is under is a block almost. The USA is blocking Venezuela in a sense that they cannot buy or sell. They got all the assets frozen. So uh, and they did sort of a hybrid warfare. I did some talks about that, which is an open type of warfare. We have to think that sanctions and this type of actions, they did it with Japan in the 30s. It ended up being in war. And so in Napoleon times, they have blockades and sanctions. So, but Venezuela is not a big power, and then Venezuela doesn't have any nuclear force. Had the Venezuela have a nuclear force, then it might be a different story, but they don't have it. North Korea have a few nuclear warheads and the means of delivering, but well, then you see, the president of the United States went to talk with Kim and Jong in Singapore and then in Vietnam. See, the president went because it's unthinkable to invade Korea having nuclear weapons. And in Venezuela, the USA is trying to do something low cost. They know this hybrid type of warfare or uprising or regime change, like they did it in several countries, but with success in Ukraine. So Victoria Nuland claimed in a telephone conversation that the USA invests 5,000 billions, 5,000 millions, 5,000 millions, not billion, millions. And that's a real low cost to capture a country. That's what they did in Ukraine, close to the boundaries, to the frontier of boundaries with Russia. That's bingo. And they almost they lost Crimea because, well, the Russia Federation, they had to. That was an imperative strategic move. Well, that's a different story. But I want to outline the world, the world that we have today and what happened the last 2 or 3 years. And the problem, of course, is from many years ago. But well, I cannot talk about those because I may be talking the whole night. Now, going back to Venezuela, the government of Maduro, they have talks in Norig with the opposition, with the radical opposition. And I think it's a desperate move to avoid an intervention. An intervention might be direct or indirect, either from Colombia's side, I don't think from Brazil's side, and in the last resort, I don't think so. The United States might intervene, and they might do it if Venezuela armed forces are fractured, but so far they're not. And we have to think about Venezuela because we have to see it from the Latin American perspective. The way societies are in Latin America, we are different. First of all, they think, let's see the Gini indexes. They are high. They are about 45, 4.9 or 5, which is very high. 6 sometimes, which is terrible. Colombia is one of the more unequal country, and they are in their drug cartels and things like that, and it's a very violent society with extreme rights paramilitaries. Now, I'm presenting the Colombia, just a few words. Brazil, it was taken over by the right wings, also political right wings with Bolsonaro. So, which is they of course the right wings they hate left governments. They hate it. That's in their blood. So they want to see the left government of Venezuela, the government, because the society is not a, a socialist society so far. And now the strategy of the government is talking about peace and love and let's avoid civil war, and which is remarkable, of course. But I have my serious doubt that that might prosper those dialogue. But on the other hand, they may see that the situation is so complicated that they may find some way of saving face or some way of arrangement. We'll see, because the the supporters of Maduro are the power the power part of the of the Venezuela, which is about 20%. But they are the difference with the barrios in Venezuela are they are organized and they are conscientized too, which are different from other countries in Latin America. They're the the more power the people which are poor, they are not organized and they are not led by any left parties. Or the left parties in South America, that's a different story. They are a minority. There's something they they make some actions, but I leave it there because that's for another talk. Now Venezuela, let's see what happened in Venezuela. I'm hoping for the best, which might be a dialogue and a negotiate solution. We'll see, because the right wing, the powerful in Venezuela, they want the government out. And the United States, of course, they support this, the radical right of Venezuela, because they want to get the Venezuela oil and another, the gold and other commodities of Venezuela. To control it, not to only to control it, the way they do it in the rest of South America, which the United States call it their backyard. A very derogative way of referring to South America, but that's the way they think, that's the way they feel. Always talking about the government of the USA, but that's a constant. And well, that's the way they actually the present situation on. Of course, there are so many topics to talk about, but I'll leave it here for tonight. Oh, thank you very much.